locking it in like this, you hear the difference? It's adding a whole other layer of warmth and richness to the track. I don't know what else to say. Second point also goes to the ROG. But okay, fine. The unboxing experience, the audio experience, you could say they're still niche features. So, let's test what's arguably the most core, fundamental phone feature for all of us, the battery. So, we'll get both phones side by side. These are brand new versions of each phone, by the way, just to make sure they have 100% battery health. I've equalized brightness and put speaker volume at 50%, so let's see who wins. The plan is we're running straight YouTube videos for the first couple of hours. Okay, wow. The iPhone is actually a reasonable amount ahead, possibly because its display can automatically reduce its refresh rate to lower than the ROG phone can when not needed, to save battery. I also reckon, though, at least some part of this is the fact that Apple's battery indicator does not tell you the truth. I'm pretty sure that iPhones hang on the first few percentage points just to reassure the user that their phone's not dropping as soon as they take it out of charge. So now, social media. We'll do Instagram and TikTok for another couple of hours. And after that, you can start to see the ROG pulling ahead. But what's really going to separate the men from the boys is some proper gaming. So we'll run some Genshin Impact, some Doom, and just basically keep these games on until the phones call it quits. Which, in the iPhone's case, gives us a total time of 9 hours and 30 minutes. I would say that is towards the upper end of modern flagships, but just not the best. Meanwhile, the ROG is still going. It's still at 37%, for goodness sake. But slowly, surely, if we push it hard enough, it too eventually dies. But it took 12 hours and 18 minutes to get there, which frankly is insane. And yes, I stood around for 12 hours to get this result. So, you know, subscribe if you appreciate it. You won't regret it. I'm only half surprised by the result. I mean, this thing does have two separate 3,000 mAh batteries inside of it, so 6,000 mAh total, which is a lot more than this guy. It's just that because it's actually the lighter phone between the two, you forget how much is in there. But then I was like, well, the phones are down here anyway. They're both at 0% right now. We might as well also test how fast they can charge. And you see why I ended up sleeping at 3 AM now. So I plugged both in, using the original charging bricks and cables provided with them, which gives the ROG up to 65 watts of power. And the iPhone, well, technically 0 watts. It doesn't come with a charger. But assuming you'll pay the extra $40 to get the fastest possible charging, this brick can deliver 27 watts of power to an iPhone 14 Pro. The iPhone's definitely off to a faster start, which might sound strange, but is not actually unheard of, because that wattage figure, it doesn't tell you the full story. Because the number only tells you the maximum charging power the phone can reach, not the power that it can keep sustaining the charge at. So anyway, as soon as the ROG phone kicks into gear, it very quickly equalizes, even slightly overtaking after just 10 minutes. And something to think about is that the iPhone also has a far smaller battery capacity too, 4,300 mAh versus 6,000. So there's just less to fill up. And so the fact that it's even close sends a very clear message that charging speed is not one of Apple's fortes. And yeah, if you look at the final times for the complete charge, ROG phone slips in at 1 hour 7 minutes, while the iPhone still has a way to go. So that's another point to the ROG. Now, you might well be thinking, well, of course the ROG phone wins all of this. It's a $1,400 phone. But this thing comes with 512 gigabytes of storage by default. And if you go for 512 gigabytes on the iPhone, it's the same price as this in the US, and actually the much more expensive phone basically everywhere else. But surely the iPhone wins in the camera department, right? The camera is one of the reasons to buy an iPhone. Well, both phones have one camera on the front and then a triple camera on the back. And there's probably not as much in it as you might expect. The ROG has more natural background blur when you're taking selfies. It's just as sharp in 98% of situations, extremely good at those difficult dynamic range situations, arguably better than the iPhone. Not to mention that it has the power to shoot full 4K slow motion, which is far beyond the 1080p that Apple can do. But where the iPhone does pull ahead is intelligence. It's the way it identifies and treats faces so that they're the center of attention. The way it uses all of its sensors to focus on subjects instantly, even for finicky, difficult objects that most phones would struggle with. Plus, just generally, the video. Video requires far more advanced processing to be able to pull off well than a simple photo. And this is where the years that Apple has spent refining really pays off. So that brings the score to 4-1. One thing that I think will be a really interesting experiment between these two is Wi-Fi speeds. Because on one hand, most of what the average user does on their phone is internet related, and so you would kind of expect the most popular flagship phone to have that internet aspect completely nailed down. But then again, this thing is all about shaving off milliseconds of lag when you're playing online competitive games. So who actually wins? All right, let's start with the iPhone. We'll do Google's speed test. Wow, okay. Not too shabby considering we're tucked into an attic. And just over 40 megabits up. Same thing for the ROG phone. Ooh. I mean, that is an absolutely enormous drop-off. That's really, really slow in comparison. But just to see if I could get a result that felt a little bit more reliable, I also ran the test 10 more times in a controlled environment, but there were actually no consistent trends. The ROG seems to have higher peak speeds, but the iPhone seems to have more consistent speeds, especially when it comes to upload. But there's enough variation that I'd say, call this one a draw. But what's even more important than a bit of slightly reduced latency here and there is how good everything actually looks on these screens. So they're both huge displays. The ROG is actually even slightly larger, but you probably wouldn't notice without a side-by-side. And they're both better in their own ways. So the ROG is technically a faster display. You know how phones have been dialing up from standard 60Hz to 90 and to now the 120Hz displays that we see on pretty much every 2023 flagship? Well, this thing has a 165Hz display. Proportionally, that should be nearly as big as the jump between 60 and a 90Hz display, which was huge. And yeah, if you scroll your home pages and record using a slow-mo camera, you will absolutely notice the difference. But my eyes are struggling to. It feels like one of those 50% more effort for 5% more gain type of situations. And to be honest, I think at this point what makes more of a difference is the quality of animations, which Apple really does have nailed down. The ROG does also have a second display on the back, although I would say it's far less useful than the rear displays on most phones that have it. It doesn't let you preview the camera or check the contents of your notifications. It is almost exclusively just for those, hey, look what my phone can do moments. And then for the iPhone, we have a higher peak brightness, 2000 nits versus 1500, which basically covers you for those extra bright outdoor scenes or those extra dark TV shows. I'm looking at you, Game of Thrones and Ozark. It has LTPO tech, which is why it can lower its refresh rate all the way down to 1 Hz when not needed, which, as you've seen, does help it to save some battery. It has a slightly higher resolution and also symmetry. I'm fully aware that the reason this ROG phone has these top and bottom bezels is that people like something to grip onto when they're gaming, not to mention in order to fit these massive speakers in. But I am just too much of a sucker for things being aligned and neat. So for me, iPhone takes the best display award. So degrees Celsius, 2 different lines of code. Benchmark until now, where I have a result I'm confident in. So essentially, Apple still has the lead when it comes to CPU, and no amount of cooling or overclocking on the ROG's end can make up for that gap. But top-level Android phones currently have a better GPU for Android, and so right now this is saturation of the screen is way. This is actually not user, but just not quite enough to warrant an entire shift